Well, welcome everyone to Resource Roundtable. Resource Roundtable is an ongoing event every third Thursday of the month, hosted by EDC Team Jefferson. And it's a place where we invite one or more guests to come and introduce themselves and their services to the people of Jefferson County.
I'm Douglas Hammel. I'm the Business Services Director for EDC Team Jefferson here in Port Townsend. Today we're going to talk about project costing. Now, this is a useful spreadsheet for any business that has is project related, like construction, printing, maritime, and many other kinds of businesses. So let me share the spreadsheet and tell you that this spreadsheet is available on our website, www.edcteamjefferson.org, and it's under services, business resources, all the way to the bottom. You can find these spreadsheets. So this is a project costing spreadsheet, and it's meant to improve your bids by identifying all the real costs in your business or for any particular project. Now, if you look at this, let's look at just the green section first. That's the project costing section. And you'll see it's divided up into labor, hours times the labor rate, materials, typically some kind of unit times a unit cost, maybe other direct costs, maybe other indirect costs, and overhead allocation, which means you have to take part of your operating expenses and allocate it to each job. And then on top of that, profit.
Douglas.
Yes.
Would you share your screen if you're showing us something?
Oh, geez, sorry. Let me see. Let's see. Let me do that first. Sorry. Okay. Can you see my screen? Can you see it now? Oops, can't hear you. You're on mute.
We can see it, but you might want to reduce it a little bit.
Reduce it. Okay.
I can only see through column J barely. That looks better. Okay.
Okay. So the green section here is the project costing. Again, one more time: direct labor, hours times units, materials, units times unit cost, maybe other things that are peculiar to your business, and overhead allocation, and your profit margin on top of this. If that's all, if this is the cost of the bid in E64, then you're going to add 20% to that, and the total bid amount there is $10,187. Now, later on, I'm going to cover where these numbers come from that are inputted to this spreadsheet, but you also have other sections, and one of the other sections is the post-project analysis, and that is your actual costs in labor and materials and overhead. So, and the third column is the variance. That means what's the difference between your bid and your actual costs. So you can see here that this variance is a negative 2,432, and in accounting terminology, anything in parentheses is negative. I just made it red, so it's even more prominent. But you can see, if you look at the detail, that they bid 100 hours, but it actually took 150 hours. So what they thought it was going to cost actually cost more, and that's the difference. So you can go item by item, and this is a self-education process. If you've done a bid, you can look at the actual results and educate yourself about where your assumptions are wrong. Clearly, this business has a wrong assumption about how long it takes to accomplish things. I didn't put in any unit costs here, but if you look down below, you can see that if we're going to allocate overhead, and this business allocates $4.70 of overhead for every hour that is booked for this job, that they needed to allocate $940, but the actual overhead on $225 is more than $1,000. So they got that wrong too. And all the differences between what was bid in the green section and what actually happened adds up to this negative number here. And where do you think that came out of? Well, that came out of profits. So if you thought you were going to have profits of 1,698, in this case, you actually had a negative. You actually lost money on this job. And that's a real education to put in the actual data and find out that you are wrong. So why are you wrong? Well, let's go look at the assumptions down below that inform these numbers. The unit cost for labor, and the overhead allocation per hour. So when we look at this spreadsheet, the first thing we have to do is look at the available labor hours, or direct labor hours for full-time employees. And you always do this calculation based on full-time, and then you can say, well, we only have half those hours for a half-time person. But to get the calculation right, you really do have to do this in the right sequence. So up here at the top, we're going to say annual hours worked per full-time direct labor employee. Now, this is not the secretary who works in the office, and this is not other people who do not do direct labor hours. These are only people who do direct labor, like the carpenters or the person varnishing your boat deck, direct labor hours. But we have to reduce those hours because all those hours cannot be applied to a job. So let's start with, standard 2,080 hours for a person, but we're going to take out vacation time, sick leave, time for seminars, trainings, all of that, and we get down to a starting place of 1,800 hours that are actually available for work. But then we have to look at what would be their full-time salary for the year, add payroll taxes to burden this salary. So the full cost burden is actually $60,075 instead of $50,000. Instead of $25,000, the full cost burden is $30,038. Now we could just divide that by this and get a direct labor cost per hour, but we haven't reduced the hours sufficiently. For example, this employee, direct labor number 1, might only do a certain portion of their hours on direct labor, money-making labor. Other hours could be in shop time. They might actually have some of their time in overhead. And so even though we have 1,800 hours here for them, after we reduce that by sick leave and vacation and so forth, when we actually question the business owner, we find out that that employee only spends 70% of their time on direct labor. So that means 70% of 1,800 is 1,260. For this one, they only spend 60% of their full-time labor. And instead of 1,800, that's $1,080. Now, when we divide this full cost burden by these actual available direct hours, we get a full cost burden per hour. So the scheme here is to say, what would be their full-time wages? What is the full cost burden? What are the real hours that they can spend on direct labor? And we get a full cost burden per hour. Now you can see down here, I've got another module that says, well, yeah, but what if they're part-time employees? Well, you could put a 0.5 in there and you can see that, well, now the actual direct labor hours are not 2340, they're 1710. And sometimes we'll have a mix where, the main labor up here is full-time. The other people, if they were full-time, they would be making 25,000, but they are all part-time employees. So you can actively get the right number of hours here to apply to the full cost burden. Okay. And again, if you did that first up here, these numbers would be exaggerated. So you need to do this on a full salary to get these numbers, and then find out actually how many hours at that rate per hour are actually going to be used in the overhead allocation per hour. Now, any questions about that? Okay, we'll go on. The other part of the analysis is to say, well, what is your overhead? If you leave all the direct labor employees out of overhead, you might have rent, utilities, water, sewer, phone, insurance, and maybe some direct labor for the owner, also for office management and so forth. In this case, I made it simple and I had the annual overhead, and this is an annual thing, we're going in annual hours, is $11,000. Now you can see here under overhead allocation available per direct labor hour, it's $4.70 per hour. What happens if we have part-time people? I'm going to go back up and change some of those people, or one of the people, to part-time. Now you can see that the overhead allocation has gone up because we have fewer hours to allocate that overhead. So you have to be very clear on how, not only on, let's go back to the top, how much time they have to spend out of a full-time load and how many actual hours they're working. Is it half-time? Is it three-quarter time? So that when we apply hours to this calculation, we get the right result at the bottom. Now, any questions about that?
Hey, Douglas, I have a question. Can you scroll
Yeah.
up just a little bit?
Yes, indeed.
So you've got payroll taxes listed under number 3, overhead, and you also have payroll tax with the direct labor. Is that double dipping?
No, it's not, because in this, these are all direct labor hours. There are no direct labor expenses down in overhead.
So the payroll tax is for somebody else then?
No, these payroll taxes are for this particular employee. If we had an employee down here, let me put in an employee. Let's say I put 10,000 in here.
So that might be a subcontractor or something?
Well, no, that's usually office personnel.
Oh,
So, and so, you know, with that going up, you can see that now instead of like $4.70, it's $9.43 because we put in additional overhead expenses.
right. So that's anybody in the back office that's contributing to the overall success of the project that you want to account for their time.
Right. And also, so let me give you another example. I have a business owner right now, you know, in approximately that area, about that much time that they can spend on direct labor, but they only spend 50% of their time on direct labor. So we've this 50% here informs the direct labor stuff, but down here we have half of their salary put into overhead, so that both the direct labor hours and the overhead can be allocated appropriately.
Okay. And the medical insurance on line 104, does that account for both direct labor and back office?
Let's see, the medical, let's see if there's medical up here, that's only for direct labor. That's the part of the cost burden for direct labor. If we had medical down here for office personnel, that would be separate.
Okay.
What we're trying to do is boil it down to, we're trying to allocate overhead by saying that it's in the same proportion as direct labor on projects. So if you spent half of all your direct labor hours on a project, you would have to have half of the overhead go with that project. So we have to be careful about separating the available direct labor hours from the overhead hours. And that's the nuance. That's why you can't just take this spreadsheet without some advice and accomplish it, because there are these little nuances that people will overlook if they're not familiar with it. So let's just remember these numbers here. It's not, well, we do have part-time employees. So let's look at this 943. Let's just take that for example. I'm going to put this back to 100%. So when we look up here, you can see that here are these numbers, 48 and 28. That's the full cost burden. There's the 48 and 28. They're flowing up into there. So if we put any hours in here, their full cost burden for that direct labor on that particular job is already calculated. Then there's typically labor, but down here, because we bid 200 hours, we have to allocate that 943. 200 times 943 is 18,870, and this is the full cost right here in E64. But we have to allocate some profit. I always say the business needs 20% profit to invest in their own growth. And also for the business owner, if they're not taking a sufficient salary, they might need that as an owner's draw also. Now the question is, when you get down to here, as you get to this bid, is will the market accept that price? If the market will not accept that price, then you have an efficiency problem. But if the market will accept that price and it's more than you have been bidding, then that is the appropriate price. Now, let's say that your customer said, well, I'm not going to pay that. Well, what if they said that they're only going to pay $5,000? Well, let's toggle this profit down. Let's say 10%. Well, that didn't do much, did it? About 5%. How about 1%? Well, you can see that there's no way that that business can do that job at $5,000, what the customer wants. So if this is a good rendition of costs in the industry and you are efficient, that is the price you should be charging, that bid grand total. And I've had clients who have been very shy of charging those prices. And I say, you have to do it once, and they do it, and their customers don't see anything wrong with it. They know that last year, to have this project done, it cost maybe 3/4 of what this bid is, but this bid means that this customer, or that this business, assuming they're efficient, is now going to have a 20% profit margin. So there are lots of things to test out in here. You can test your assumptions up here against reality, and you can fix those assumptions for the next part of the bid. You can test how much in profit margin you'd make if you reduce the bid. And you can ask yourself whether that is an outrageous price. That means you have to focus on efficiency. So there are lots of self-diagnostics involved in this, but you do need a business counselor to step you through it one step at a time. So what I'll do is I'll present this paradigm. We will go through the hours calculations, all these blue cells. We will do a rendition of all of last year's overhead accurately, and then we'll start doing bids. And on the very first bid, it usually turns out that it's, more than what they would have bid in their ad hoc method, where they've got a black box of labor, overhead, and profit that they're estimating. And now when they break it out, they find out that the reason that they're struggling in their business is they're charging too little. And so what we do is we go back. First, we test the assumptions again in the spreadsheet against previous bids. So we'll take 5 previous bids and run them through the project costing system and find out how much money they left on the table with their clients. Then when they're confident that they have a good project costing system, on the very next bid, like in this bid, 11,323, they will hand that to a customer. And if the customer doesn't have a bad reaction, they just improve their profit margin from wherever they were to 20% on that job and every future job. And that's quite common. I've had at least 3 or 4 clients in the last month where they went from 2.5% or 4% to 20% on one bid. In some cases, that saved the business because they were really suffering under low profits. In some, it just informed them that they didn't know enough about their business, and now they're very happy. Not only did they put in a wage for themselves, but now they're getting profits too. And I want to point out this over here in A67. I wrote that in about 10 years ago. It says, fight the bias to charge a low profit. That's because I had a very resistant client, but I had forgotten that was there. And I was sitting with clients doing this, and they were going to, from the project costing system, they were going to reduce the bid, even though the project costing system was right in front of them. They looked over at that sentence in A67, they both started to laugh because that's exactly what they were considering. So they went ahead and they charged the client with the project costing system, and the client didn't even blink. So it takes that kind of feedback from the market to tell you that you actually are accurate in your bidding. So questions about that?
I have questions.
Yeah.
So I have a specific client who lives in a very remote location and is quite concerned because he's not making enough money. And he told me what the prices are that he charges, and I'm thinking he's below market. This will prove that he's below market, and therefore it's the reason that he is not surviving well. He's just...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's easier than that. Like I had an electrical installer, was charging $55 as an incentive to his clients to use his work, but he was always overloaded. The rate back then, about 20 years ago, was $65 an hour. And I said, just go to 65. He didn't lose a single client. He also implemented emergency fees. And his
Oh,
trucks
good.
were literally chained to his front porch to keep the repo man from taking them. And when he started to do accurate bidding, well, he was able to pay the trucks off.
Yeah, so this person tells me that he's charging for a heat pump with branded name and he's licensed, bonded, et cetera, with the state as he should be. And he's competing against people who are not licensed, bonded, and have cheap products with no brand name. And what to do about that. So that's a different question. But he told me the prices he's charging, which were somewhere around at the max $9,000 for a whole brand new unit for a house. And I know we had bids for our house in Sunland. We had bids of, I want to say, $15,000 to $19,000 for similar, so I just think he's undercharging, but this is going to be a valuable resource for him to understand what he needs to do to thrive.
Yeah, absolutely. And, again, like he's an installer. This is good also for remodels, trades, installers, logging, arborists, maritime, all kinds of construction, printing, anybody who does a single project, a one-off project, and gives it to their customer. This is a useful spreadsheet.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Okay, so I'm going to unshare my screen. Did I do it? Share. Do I have to say unshare? Let's see. How do I unshare my screen?
There should be a little red button either at the top.
Oh, stop share. There it is. Okay, didn't see it. There we go. So Cindy, I guess I hand it back to you.
Well, I didn't plan a presentation for today, Douglas. So
okay,
if we want to go through that worksheet with an example or something, we'll have a short session today.
Okay. So I mean, the example on the spreadsheet was already there, so I think we've already done that.
Okay. Do you have a story to share about someone who's used that sheet and had changed their outcome?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yes, maritime industry, two maritime industries. One had a profit margin of 4%. After a couple of weeks of vetting this, so that they were, confident in it, they went to a 20% profit margin in just that short a period of time. They could have done it that day, implemented it, and got a 20%. Another maritime person was charging 30% less than they needed to have a shop, buy materials, have a decent wage for themselves, actually make a living to be able to pay rent in Jefferson County. And so their bids jumped by about 30% and nobody blinked an eye. Another one was a family with a project-based business where they didn't have enough money for food. And but they were waiting for a customer to come in to do a bid or to present them with a estimate. And we did the project costing system right there the hour before that customer came in. And it was going to be at least 35% higher than that customer thought they were going to pay. But that was and because we changed policy also that you have to pay for everything up front because there was a collections problem too. And so on that very next bid, they got $3,000, which means they bought food for their family that night. And from that point on, they were certain they were getting a 20% profit margin. And again, only one out of maybe 300 of their customers complained about the pricing, but they still paid it. So it's a powerful tool for project-based businesses because it has an instantaneous result.
So this conversation must dovetail nicely with your presentation on pricing then.
Yes, well, I mean, this for certain businesses, this is the pricing spreadsheet where you directly attack that pricing with the project itself. Now, if you're not project-based, then the cash flow projection is the better tool for that because you can put in revenues by month, expenses by month, and then I typically put a toggle switch in that you can raise your prices by a certain percentage, and then you can look at the bottom. And so I had a restaurant that when we did their cash flow, it was all red ink at the bottom. And we put two toggle switches in up on the cash flow. One was for price increases and one was for efficiency. like reduction in labor costs. And what I told the restaurant owner was, you have to have a 25% increase in prices and a 5% decrease in your labor costs. And they went ahead and did it. They just implemented it. They had to wait a week or so to print new menus, but the business became profitable as soon as they implemented the efficiency and the price increases.
Nice.
Yeah, it's really powerful to know what the levers are and, you know, what kind of small change you can make to really make your business profitable.
Well, and some of these, some of the results are either business killing or business vivifying results that you can see clearly that the business will go under if you don't make the changes. And there's a nice level of motivation there with the anxiety to say, yeah, you don't think you can do this, but if you don't, you'll be done. And especially in the restaurant, nobody even noticed. They loved the restaurant. It was a local business. They didn't complain about the pricing at all.
Are you pretty aware of industry margins? Like what kind of profit we should expect if we're a restaurant versus a manufacturing firm?
I think everybody should have a minimum of a 20% profit margin. I don't, and I tell my clients, you know, I say, don't worry about the competition. You need to manage your business better than everybody else. And if you're as efficient as you can, then you deserve to have a 20% profit margin and a decent wage. And so we build all that right into the spreadsheet, and then we manipulate the business to get them that wage, get them that profit margin. And again, it's pricing, efficiency, and volume. And so the project costing system really has to do with pricing. If they're inefficient, if the bids seem exorbitant, well, then we can focus on efficiency. And then from good efficiency and good pricing, we can add volume to that.
Yeah, I like that order of things. You know, often I've been a business owner, and often you just think, wow, if I could just sell more, I'd make more money. But if the pricing's not dialed in, and, you know, we could be losing money on every sale. And if it's not efficient, then I could just be adding a lot of extra work for little profit. So doing those 3 steps in order is pretty important.
Yeah, and I mean, what I tell my clients is, if you add volume to bad efficiency and bad pricing, you'll just kill the business faster.
Yes, and use up their own money.
Well, if let's say that they had even a 0.5% negative profit margin, you add volume to that, you will just dig a bigger hole faster.
Yeah.
And usually that's why it's good to get clients in a crisis. I mean, it's not pleasant for them, but it's good for the counselor, because you can give them paradigms to use and they are willing to try anything at that point. And when they see the effectiveness of your counseling, first of all, they become believers in your institution and in you. They get relief, they get profits, and now they're willing to come back and learn something more.
Yep. So it's good. The crisis has gotten their attention, where maybe all the classes in the world could never do that.
Yeah, and also classes are, you know, you take a class, a business class of some kind, they don't tell you where it fits in the paradigm for a turnaround or expansion. It could be something that's way down the priority list that they've learned. And if they implement it, like say you take a class in marketing and suddenly you increase volume, and then you kill your business and you wonder what happened. So yeah, I like to tell them, if they've taken a class, let's place it in this turnarounds and expansions diagram and say, where does it belong? Is it the first thing we're going to do? Is it in the middle? Is it last? How many prerequisites do we have to cover before we get to that issue you learned in class?
Well, this has been really useful, Douglas. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Should we call it a wrap for today?
Let's wrap it.
All right. Well, thanks for coming, everyone. And we'll see you next month on the 3rd Thursday at noon.